All right, so in front of me here is an interesting keyboard known as the, I need to say this correctly, wooting 60HE Plus. That is the name of this keyboard. This keyboard is meant as a gaming keyboard. It is not necessarily a ergonomic keyboard whatsoever. However, there is some tech in this thing that does make me wonder if perhaps this could be a much more ergonomic keyboard, if only there were a few changes. And I think this keyboard does a few things that ergonomic keyboard manufacturers might also be able to learn from, because there really is an interesting trick that you can do with this keyboard. I will explain how I configure this keyboard in just a bit, but I just want to give your attention to this one thing. I have a button over here, and I'm going to press it slightly, and then I'm going to press it down and down and down more. So I'm going to press it slightly now, I'm going to press it down and down and down, and eventually, I'm able to reach the deep end, so to say. And I can do that with a lot of these buttons, basically. You might think that's interesting, but once you start thinking about it, that's actually really, really interesting, because normal keyboard switches that you're going to find in most ergonomic keyboards won't be able to do that. So to explain how that works, let's have a look at this normal switch. You can see that there are these two pins that come out, right? The reason why there's wires there is because a normal keyboard would need it. When you press the key, at some point you're going to hit this point internally where two wires meet, and that means electronic signals can pass through and that the keyboard can register that a certain button is actually being pressed. But it means that you have to travel and travel and travel until you hit that one actuation point, so to say. But because I'm able to, go down and down and down and down and back up again, and you can measure the full path, that means that we're not dealing with a single actuation point anymore. That means that we're dealing with something that can actually measure the full path. And that's also part of the story here. The switches in this thing are fundamentally different. In fact, if you have a look at this switch, you will notice that there are no pins sticking out whatsoever. You can, however, see a hole, and if you squint your eyes, you can actually see that there's something that you can move in and out, kind of. But in short, the mechanism inside of this switch is just fundamentally different than the mechanism in a normal switch. If you Google online, you might see a term Hall effect switches, but in short, there's more of a magnetic mechanism in this thing. And that really allows you to measure exactly where the button is in its key press. And that is also why the keyboard internally can visualize how far something is actually being pressed. So, okay, that's cool. Why is this interesting? Well, if you're a gamer, then fast reaction times is a thing. So one thing you might want to do is you might want to say, well, some buttons really need to be able to trigger very quickly, and other buttons can trigger somewhat slowly. So you might want to say something like, okay, maybe the movement keys or something like that has to be very fast, but this other button really needs to be pressed in further. So that is something you can actually configure using your software. So kind of want to show that. All right, so this is the configuration software for wooting. I think it's called Wootility. And you can see that I've got this keyboard over here, but there are different tabs. But if you just go to the Performance tab down below, then you can see that I'm able to change the activation point of a lot of the keys. So I could say, well, these keys just actuate immediately, or these keys really need to travel and bottom out before like an actual actuation is triggered. You are also able to change this per key. So just to give the quickest demo, one thing I figured I might do is just go for two extremes. So the T over here, I'm going to set that to 0.1 millimeters. Like the T will trigger super quick. And then the Y over here, that's going to trigger super duper slow. Right? That's something I could do. I'm going to hit done. I'm going to hit save to keyboard. And if I were then to go to Sublime Text, I'm going to do my best to trigger both keys at the same time by using this switch puller. And here we go. Ah yes, T is already pressed, but now I'm going to go all the way down, and then Y is pressed. So pronto, there you go. You can really customize how deep you have to press the button, and that is kind of a cool feature when you're a gamer, but you can also imagine for most people that can be kind of useful. The fact that you can really customize each switch individually anywhere on the keyboard, that is a nifty technique in general. So let's move both of those two keys back to normal. Another thing to also maybe observe at this point is that you can use their configurator software to really remap the keys as you see fit. There are some limitations that we'll get to, but just to give an example of something you could do, you will notice that the shift over here with the menu, control, and function keys over here, that's my arrow cluster. I've just turned those into arrows. And what I really like to do on my keyboard is I like to install these things called Homerow modifications. When I have my hands on the home row position, then I really like it if my index fingers can press F and J or trigger Shift if I keep it pressed down. That is something you could configure. So just to give maybe the quickest demo of that, hello in all caps can be written down just by keeping F pressed down, or J for that matter. Yes. And this is something you can do for Shift, but you can also do it for Control, Command, Alt, and those buttons, which is what these other ones are for. And what I've also done is I've set Alt over here to be a toggle, so I can toggle between some layers. That's something I can somewhat easily do. But what you can also do is you can also say, well, spacebar, if I keep that pressed down for long enough, that will also trigger a layer. One thing you can also do though, like if you want to turn these keys into Homerow modifiers, then you can remap the keys, of course, and you can set the color and all that. But there's also this feature called advanced keys, and this allows you to do quote-unquote fancy things with the keys. One thing you can do, let me just hit any button here, is you can set mod tap behavior. So the behavior for keeping a button pressed down is different than the behavior of just triggering a button real quick, so tick or hold are two different actions. There's also a toggle that you can do. But something that's quite unique to this keyboard technology is that there's also this thing called the dynamic keystroke that you can do. And what is that? Well, I configured one for this layer. So this is a button that has dynamic keystroke over here. But what I'm basically able to configure here is that as the button moves down, if it reaches a certain point, it can trigger stuff along the way. And when I remove my finger, and if the button were to go back up again, it can trigger other stuff on its path back. And that's kind of interesting. So just to give a demo of this, what's configured here is that, and let's actually set the actuation point to be super high because that demo is a bit better. But what I've done here is I've said, well, if that button goes down, once it reaches the actuation point of 0.4 millimeters, then you're going to type A. Then as it moves down and down and down again, it might go ahead and trigger B. Then when it's bottomed out and it goes back up again, it's going to go past this 3.6 millimeter mark again, then type C. And then if it reaches the 0.4 first actuation point again, then it's going to type D. So with one button, you could theoretically trigger 4 actions. And I kind of just want to give a very quick demo of that because it's just kind of unusual. So this Q button over here is the button in question. So I'm going to press it ever so slightly. And then I'm going to move it back up. So that's A and D. Like I didn't go deep enough to trigger all the configured buttons. But if I were now to sort of trigger A and D, but now I'm going to go deep and then back up again, you can see that I trigger A, B, C, D. And when you go back to the configurator software, hopefully it also makes sense because as the button goes down, it's going to trigger A, then B, then it's all the way down, and then it can go back up. If you're really knee-deep into playing video games, then I think this is useful because some shortcuts can say, hey, what's my range? And then if you press deeper, you're going to cast a spell or something. There might be some things you could do with this that are relatively clever in the realm of programming. I don't use this feature at all, but I do think it's interesting because it shows you just other stuff you can do with these kinds of switches. And hopefully at this point you do kind of recognize that, yeah, this is actually kind of neat. You're really able to sort of customize the keyboard a bit, even if you're more of a typist. And there's just a lot of merit to that. Another thing that I also just very quickly want to show is kind of the typing experience. The switches that you get are not the most silent switches out there, but they're pretty silent. And again, I've got Homerow modifications here, so when I type this, you should notice my hands do not change position as much thanks due to Homerow modifiers! Exclamation point. So again, tapping experience is kind of nice. It's not really an ergonomic layout. If you wanted to make this more ergonomic, definitely do something with palm pads or maybe make it split and make it columnar and Maybe not have a tinting angle that goes up, maybe something a little bit more like this. But let's now maybe talk about the downsides from an ergonomics kind of perspective. Like, I kind of looked at this keyboard and I kind of figured it would be kind of a fun challenge just to see ergonomic I can get this guy. And it turns out that this keyboard really is designed for gamers, and it doesn't have the ergonomic programmer in mind whatsoever. And it's little things, but it is stuff I do want to at least mention. On my keyboard, what I usually like to do is I like to have open close bracket, open close square bracket, like those kinds of buttons. I like to have them in the middle over here. So when I keep spacebar pressed down, that's sort of my main modifier key. Then if I want to do open close bracket, I really like to have that on the G and the H. And I really like to have open close square bracket on the T and the Y, and the curly brackets on the B and the N. So let's try and configure that. I'm going to go to this function layer over here. And yeah, I'm just going to start with a simple thing. I'm going to say open close square bracket. So I'm going to go to the configurator here. Square bracket, there we go. Square bracket, there we go. So that's neat. Okay, now I want to do the circle bracket. So there will be Shift 9 and Shift 0 on a normal keyboard. And that key simply doesn't appear. I've had a look at these extended characters as well, and you know, it's got some of the basics, it's got arrows and stuff. But even if I have a look at these special characters are here for like multimedia stuff. If I really want to be able to customize this board, I would have really expected me to be able to have a button for open close circular bracket, and curly bracket for that matter. But the software, as is, doesn't really support that. I can even try and search for that character, and it's just not gonna appear. This is a huge bummer, if I'm honest. I could also have a look at a relatively cheap NuFi board, and you can have software that's somewhat generic, and that would totally work. The wooting one, missed opportunity. But the Homerow Mods also have something that leaves to be desired. And this is a subtle thing. But let's go back to Sublime Text. I'm just going to type the word fast really fast. You'll notice, if I'm able to type quickly, that I'm not able to type the word fast. Instead, I seem to be getting FA and then this T character. Now, the reason for this is because I'm using Homerow modifiers. If S is pressed down, then in my case, I'm keeping Alt pressed down. If I just do an S tap, that would be fine, but keeping S pressed down is triggering Alt. And Alt T, well, that's one of those special characters. All of these letters become kind of special characters when you have Alt pressed down. So initially I thought, oh, that's fine. I just have to go to the configurator and maybe configure the timing a bit. And you can actually configure the timing. Like if I go to this button over here, there is this advanced setting that you can press. Then you can say, hey, override the whole duration. And then you can sort of move this up or down again. So I figured, you know, let's do the ridiculous thing. Let's set it to 500 milliseconds. You really got to keep that button pressed down for long. Like, this is a way for me to prevent accidental alt triggers. Let's go for this. So I'm going to hit done, save to keyboard. So let's now see what happens when I type S and T in sequence real quick. And again, this is not half a second in between. So what's going on here? Well, you have to read the fine print. If you type learn more over here, then you can read the text and it'll show you a little detail. 2 different actions on a single key based on press behavior. Hold the key down for the first action, or tap the key for the second action. The hold key is immediately activated when it's a modifier key and combined with another key, unless the other key is also a mod tap key. So, this might make sense from the perspective of, oh, we're trying to do things for gamers. But if you're trying to be a programmer and you're interested in doing precision timing and the Alt key can kind of matter here, well, here's the weird thing. If you want that properly to work, I'm going to have to go hit the T button over here, turn the T into a Mods tap key, one that just behaves like T as you would normally. And now when I save to keyboard and go back to Sublime Text, then it starts respecting the half-a-second rule that you got to keep pressed down. So if I now keep Alt pressed down for long and now I type T again, then I do get that special character. And it's stuff like this that really makes it very hard for me to enjoy using this keyboard even when I do get Homerow mods to kind of work. Because theoretically I could use a mod tap on every other key that's on display here, but you only get 40 of these advanced keys because that's the amount that fits on the firmware of this thing. And it's stuff like that that I do think can be improved in this configuration software. As it currently stands, it seems like I might have to buy a Keychron board, which usually doesn't have the best customer support, in order to get these Homerow mods to be remotely to what I'm used to. Don't get me wrong, like I do appreciate the fact that you can configure the timing and the actuation point. Like that would be amazing if I don't have to worry about stuff like this. So I would really love it if there was maybe just some sort of button that can alter this base behavior. Might be asking for a lot, I know, but still, it does feel like that will make this keyboard so much more useful. Some other things that I think are also missing is just mouse support. This keyboard over here, it is built on top of something called QMK. You can use an app called Use Via to configure this guy. And one of the things you can configure is mouse movement and button presses. That's something you can totally configure. And my impression is that that is just not possible here. And it is a bit surprising to me. When I look at the special characters, I am able to find the left mouse button and the right one and the middle one. Like I'm able to find the mouse buttons, but I wasn't able to find the mouse movement. Again, if you're a gamer, you probably just use the mouse as is, and you might be interested in using the keyboard with a rapid trigger to be faster at something, I guess. Like, it makes some sense. But again, it's like another one of these small things that if they were to add that to this keyboard, then I might also be able to recommend this keyboard. For sure, the shape of the keyboard can make it more ergonomic, but the way you program the keyboard for sure matters. And if you're a programmer as opposed to a gamer, or maybe you're both a gamer and a programmer, then you do want to be able to properly customize this board also for the programmer setting. And at the moment, I'm sad to say, you can't. And that is a bummer, because I do think there is something about these switches, the fact that you can really measure them, something about that just screams that you can do awesome things for ergonomics with it. And a buddy of mine actually had this suggestion. Imagine that you're learning how to touch type, and sometimes you mispress, but when you mispress, you don't press as deep. Well, it does kind of smell like you could do something with machine learning here. You could do something where, hey, as you're typing, the keyboard is also learning from you, and it might also be able to adapt to you because it can sort of figure out how far you're actually interested in typing all of these different keys. And when you think about it that way, then suddenly a whole new world opens up. Especially when you consider these Homerow mods. Like, it'd be kind of amazing that the Homerow modifier could only be triggered if I really bought them out. And it's stuff like that I would love to be able to configure. And for that, I really do need these magnetic switches. But these switches only appear in gamer keyboards at the moment. And you can just kind of feel that they're, from a distance, appreciate that the needs of a gamer are probably different than the needs of someone who's more interested in ergonomics. And that's where there's kind of a shame. I would love for these magnetic switches to become more elaborately available also in hobby boards, but I also understand they're kind of a niche technology currently mainly focused on the gamer market. I can also imagine the gamer market being substantially bigger than the ergonomic market, if I'm honest. So yeah, with a bit of luck, maybe Wooting is listening. That'd be super cool. I do think there's something really likable about this board. It also feels like really well built and all that, so like, you know, no complaints. I just think the board would be so much more valuable if it could also do like a little bit more of the ergo stuff. And if not Wooting, well, then maybe all you ergonomic keyboard vendors can also maybe dig in on this. There is a lot of stuff that opens up if you're able to make use of these magnetic switches, but Until then, I think this is a really cool board that is cool for gamers. That just misses out on a lot of ergonomic potential, even though it's just like cool.